Lena Khan is 3 years out of law school. I can't think of anyone that Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple should fear more than her. That girl has game.
Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of our podcast with Greg Kidd. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So today, our topic is going to be a little company called Facebook. Greg, I know you have a lot of strong opinions about Facebook. Obviously, the big news from a few weeks ago was their WhatsApp privacy update that I think a lot of users reacted pretty strongly to. We saw huge downloads for platforms like Signal, like Telegram. At least for me, that felt like a big moment because I think historically privacy and Facebook has a history of these privacy faux pas, and it's been a topic of conversation for tech journalists and the media, but to see people taking strong action, I feel like is a sign of the times. Greg, what was your take?
Well, it's a little bit like that scene in Casablanca where the Inspector General, the Frenchman, he comes in and he's been told to shut down the casino, and he blows the whistle, and they ask, like, well, what's the problem? He says, I can't believe that there's gambling in this cafe. And of course it's a casino, and somebody walks up to him and brings him his poker chips because he's won a bunch of money at the casino. But I'm surprised that people are surprised that there's an issue about what Facebook is doing with the data from WhatsApp. And in many ways, this is a little bit of a tempest in a teapot. They're just coming clean on what they've been trending toward all along. I mean, they held back some with WhatsApp because of they didn't want to alienate the community. But look, there is a master plan at Facebook. It is to integrate all the data together from Instagram, from WhatsApp, from the core Facebook properties, and they're just having to come clean about that now. And so some people are taking their messaging business elsewhere, and Telegram and Signal have been the main beneficiaries. It's kind of like long overdue. So, but it is, like you say, a bit of a marker when people are voting with their feet.
You mentioned the master plan, right? Because Mark Zuckerberg had that privacy pivot blog post from last year. I know you read it. What was your reaction to that?
Well, it's always easy to run downhill than uphill. So when you see that the direction of your existing business model is going to be challenged, and, somebody has moved the cheese. If you're a mouse, it's good to go where the cheese is. And I think that Mark sees that in the future, he's had a good run of it with making people the product and an advertising-based model, but he could have another model. I mean, Facebook could be very powerful in a more instrumental way with their properties and whatnot. And so, Facebook could pivot, like they were going to pivot into Libra. People are afraid that when they pivot, not that they're going to fail, but that they're going to succeed. And they'll be even more scary and more harmful when they succeed in their pivot than when they keep sticking with what they're already doing. And so, one of the challenges when you tell Facebook, for instance, that, hey, we're upset about all that content on Facebook, and what you're really saying is, Facebook, do something about it. They might actually do something about it. And you might like even less what they do about it than what the situation was before they did something about it. And so this is the scary thing when you have an entity that has as much overt and covert power as Facebook. Be careful what you ask for, because you may get that and much more.
So one of the things is that regulators are paying attention now, right? We have the FTC lawsuit against Facebook. There are some class action lawsuits. One lawsuit that you mentioned to me that I should read. Do you want to give us an overview of sort of the legal situation right now?
Well, hey, the good news is for Facebook is that 4 states aren't suing them. The bad news is 46 others are. So, but look, the lawsuit that came out, it's really following up on issues that were broached over a year earlier in a case that involved Lendo, one of our portfolio companies in Hard Yakka. It involves the fact that Facebook has cut off or circumscribed API access to over 40,000 developers. And look, anybody can choose to decide to not be in the API business, but when you actually get into it, through some leaks about past internal Facebook correspondence, it's pretty clear that Facebook was involved in the scheme of encouraging developers to build on top of its Graph API. And then it systematically cut them off, except the ones that were willing to A, give them enough data in return to make it worth it, B, pay them a lot of money, and C, were in areas that they didn't feel threatened in, such as dating or rideshare services. But oh my gosh, if you were in the messaging business, there is no way you weren't going to get cut off. Or if you were Twitter that had a new product out like Vine, there's no way that API and that graph was going to be open. And so it was a very Tony Soprano set of decisions to both lure people in, trap them in, cut them off. And so it operated much more like, you could say it's antitrust, you could say it's anti-competitive, but anybody who's worked in the mafia knows this looks more like a RICO investigation type situation. And it's been couched for now by the states in terms of antitrust and anti-competitive activities, but there's some other litigation that's coming down the pike that says, hey, we know what this is. This is just plain old extortion. And the legal rules that are being brought to bear there are really along the lines of RICO, which is a racketeering charge. And so it comes back to what that master scheme is. And, we wouldn't really know about that, but some of those emails leaked out. And just as 20 years ago, Bill Gates saying, hey, we're going to suck the oxygen out of the jar. That's not the cuddly Bill Gates we know today with the Gates Foundation. That was the brass knuckle Bill Gates of 1999. Those emails are coming out from Mark Zuckerberg. And, he might have to talk in front of a judge or in a deposition about what the heck he meant when he said and did the things he did.
So there are these legal challenges that Facebook is facing. There's sort of the user expectation challenges, right, with people moving to more private encrypted platforms, right? What do you see as like the actual solution to these problems, right? Because sure, we can have regulators, antitrust cops come in, like let's say they break up Facebook. Does that actually fix the problem? Like what is the solution here?
So despite all those harsh statements, I'm not someone who favors breaking up Facebook. I mean, it's happened. Like they've bought Instagram, they've bought WhatsApp. What I'm looking for is a rules of the game approach where regulators, policymakers lay out clear rules of what rights people have over their data, what rights other companies have to interoperate with Facebook when users say, I want to share my data with X, but not with Y, and whether Facebook respects that or disrespects it. Currently, right now, Facebook's terms of use allow it to override the preferences of the users over their own data. Facebook treats the graph, all the different intricacies of your interactions, as belonging to them rather than belonging to you. It's that simple. They think the graph of your interactions belongs to them rather belongs to the person who is behind all those interactions. That's a fundamental problem for me in terms of agency in the world. If we don't own our own graph, then we're ants. And I don't want to live in a world where people are ants. And so they've used Cambridge Analytica, where some third-party developer abused that access to use it as actually a sword to punish everybody else who isn't abusing and is actually using user data at the bequest of the user. And so they've created this whole shakedown ecosystem of who does and doesn't get to use the data. And completely slams and ignores people. And so the antitrust, the anti-competition, even the RICO debates, those are all good legal issues. But at the end of the day, there's a deeper issue, a more fundamental issue of who owns the data in Facebook. And it's the same question really for Airbnb or Uber or eBay. Like if you have a good reputation on eBay, should you be able to like share that with whoever you want to share it with? Or does eBay own your reputation? Does Uber own your reputation? Does Airbnb, or do you own your reputation and the platforms service you? And it's the same thing with Facebook. So Facebook's just the biggest poster child. They have the most data. They're the most onerous burden if that data is locked down. But we're just in the first inning of realizing that there's going to be a tussle and a battle over access to that data and control of who that data gets shared with, including shared with no one, because people want to keep it private. So whether people want it more private or more shared, in both cases, Facebook is saying, hey, speak to the hand, right?
Well, Apple seems like they have a solution they'd like to offer, right? With their new privacy updates to their platform. Facebook clearly not happy about that. Google is looking at alternatives to cookies potentially. You talk about the ad-based data sort of driven world. Is this the beginning of something new, and will we need to explore different kinds of models, or is this sort of just infighting between one big tech company versus another?
Well, it is a little bit of like Godzilla versus Mothra. That was a movie I loved when I was a kid. And you didn't know who was going to win, but you knew Tokyo was going to get slammed, right? Because they're fighting in the downtown, right? To some extent, like Apple has picked what they're good at. I mean, they're good at controlling choke points in the system of hardware, choke points in terms of payments. They don't need advertising revenue. So they have no problem with cutting Facebook off at the knees and making it really hard for them to get fine-grained data to better target advertising. So they know how to hit them where it hurts. And Facebook, after taking that gut punch, can hit back and say, well, Apple, your hands aren't so clean. Anyways, too. Last time we looked, you were getting sued for some of the naughty stuff you're doing. And so, each of these big guys, Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, they each have there's a reason they all got like hauled down to Congress, because they did a collective, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's gambling in this casino. Like I never seen Jeff Bezos look, oh, you mean Amazon took data for like folks that were selling on our platform and we used it to like build companies to compete against our own customers? Gosh, really? So each of them doing that kind of like mea culpa, it's a little bit hard to like stomach and take. And so it is just a tumbling and tussling, but each of them are shining a spotlight on the other's problematic behavior so that people are deflected from looking at the problems that they have themselves. Facebook, I don't think is, well, I will say Facebook has a more comprehensive scheme than Apple or Google. Maybe Jeff Bezos is as comprehensive, but he isn't, well, I don't know. I don't have all his emails either. So it's a hard toss up between who's got a bigger master plan, Bezos or Zuckerberg.
One of the big things when Zuckerberg's published that blog post about the privacy pivot is that it sort of came out around the same time as Libra, and it seemed that those two strategies were very intertwined, right? If you have a private messaging platform, then you need to introduce value into it of some form. Telegram had a similar strategy with their Ton network, which they put the kibosh on because of the SEC. And Telegram, as far as I know, they haven't made money yet, actually. So is that where we're going? And what do you think of this new sort of private messaging plus value type model?
I just saw in the paper today that Jack Ma over at Ant, he's going to like kowtow to his superiors. They said, thank you very much for processing $17 trillion of payments on your platform last year. It's a pretty nice market. That plus WeChat, integrating messaging and payments. Oh my gosh, that's the big kahuna. And only in China do they do it at that level. Telegram, Facebook, they can see the writing on the wall. They like a piece of that, okay? Telegram had a very comprehensive strategy to do that. Unfortunately, they ran afoul of the SEC and they put a big bullet in it. Facebook had a very big plan to do that as well, but given their other privacy snafus and sort of throwing their weight around, people weren't afraid that Libra wouldn't work. They were afraid that it would work. And so both of them have been thwarted in carrying out in their own European or American way what WeChat and Alipay have achieved in China. And so it is pretty clear that that's the next frontier. And you could do a privacy pivot and make even more money if you could pull off a WeChat-like strategy. And Facebook certainly has the properties, and the boys over at Telegram, they're pretty clever and they're pretty focused. Those are two groups that could pull it off, but they face now public policy, regulatory pushback and blowback. And in the case of Facebook, a lot of private litigation as well. And so it's kind of a jump ball now, given that those folks that clearly have the chops to do this have got a spotlight and some hair on them now and may not be able to pull it off. That's kind of the reason why I get up and go to work each day, is that, it's not a foregone conclusion that Facebook and Telegram are going to be able to pull it off. There might be a little daylight for the rest of us.
Obviously, one of the challenges both those companies are facing is the lack of regulatory clarity. Well, what do you think the new administration could do to sort of help enable companies to sort of start building, the building blocks for the next sort of WeChat in America, right? Which again is well behind China in digital payments.
Well, I have to say that whether it was the Obama administration, the Trump administration, or the Biden administration, I'm not sure any of those leader organizations have a vision of like what that future could or should look like. I don't think that they thought that the WeChat Alipay model is a good or desirable thing for the United States. I don't think they have a vision of like what the future should be. They can't agree like whether there should be like a national identity system, whether there should be electronic voting, where like they can't agree if there's going to be like censorship of content, how that should happen, like who should decide, should there be more censorship, less censorship. There isn't a consensus right now, and it's not a Trump versus Biden thing. There's just not a big picture view in the Trump administration or the Biden administration of what the future could look like. The Chinese have a much more cohesive view. I'm not saying I agree with it, but they got a view of what their future wants to look like. And they took Alipay and WeChat Pay down a notch, right? They're like, okay, you guys are getting a little too big for your britches. We're going to take you down a notch. You're still going to be very powerful, but you're going to be powerful, but we're going to make sure we're on top. In the US here, in Europe, we still don't really know what we want. If you just basically said to all those states that are suing Facebook right now, okay, you're king for the day. Tell us what you want Facebook to do, and and Amazon and Google and Apple. You get to be king and tell them how you want them to behave over the next 10 years. I have no idea what they would come up with, because there isn't a consensus in our society about how we want tech leaders to play. We know we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, but that doesn't mean we have a plan or a vision for how we want the future to be. Like, my personal view is that it would be better if it was more bottom up, but almost all the solutions I'm hearing from both the Trump administration and the Biden administration are pretty damn top down. And they usually start with something like the US dollar is, and then fill in the blank. And so that's a very top down attitude. It is not bottom up. And look, hey, China's top down too. And so look, I'm from the bottom up world, We're still just looking to make sure a big boulder or asteroid doesn't come out of the sky and crush or incinerate us. But there is a pause. There is indication that the status quo isn't going to be the status quo anymore, but we don't have an idea of what tomorrow, let alone the future, is going to look like.
Certainly lots of uncertainty. The positive, I guess, is like you mentioned, there will be change. Everyone is sort of paying attention right now.
Something's going to happen. There's a whole set of new companies coming up. When you look at, not just Telegram and Signal, but you look at Discord, you look at Twitch, you look at OnlyFans, you look at all these new platforms, you look at what happened with Zoom coming out of sort of nowhere. There's a new set of kids in the neighborhood. And look, they're not about to topple the big four right now, but the seeds are there and the valuations of the movement is happening. And so it is not a static situation. It is a dynamic situation. It's a great time to be around. It is Mothra, Godzilla, and a couple of others, and Tokyo is probably going to get pretty beaten up. And we live in Tokyo.
Well, I suppose Twitch is already owned by Amazon, but it's possible that it's less likely that Discord is bought up by another big tech company. I know that you saw that the Visa Plaid merger got canceled, right?
That's right. That's people waking up and saying, gosh, Plaid's how all this disruptive data gets to the disruptors. Visa buys it. How much data gets to the disruptors? Maybe that's not such a great idea for competition and innovation, and we ought to do something like stop the deal. Okay, they stopped the deal, but the game is still on. Like, we haven't really figured out, okay, we stopped the deal with Visa owning Plaid, but we haven't put a stake in the ground to make open banking really work. There's no app out there that's like a generic app that lets you see your balance from any bank and initiate a payment. They're still pretty much closed shops, right? Like, we're a long ways from open anything, right? And the open internet itself is at risk, but all these other developments are still pretty locked down by the big guys. And whether it's big tech or the big banks, there are all this disruption happening, but it's still biting away at the fringe.
I think what you're saying is, the blocking maneuvers are important, but ultimately we need, especially because these platforms are so important now, right? We need clear rules around things like data ownership, interoperability. I was reading the Zuckerberg blog post today, and it was funny because when Zuckerberg says interoperability, he means between WhatsApp and Instagram. He doesn't actually mean interoperability between networks, right?
Well, the new defense for Facebook for cutting off developers is, hey, it's Section 230. It's our free speech to cut off developers from accessing data that users want to share with those developers. It's our free speech right to prevent interoperation outside of the Facebook ecosystem. Okay, I'm pretty sure that when Congress passed Section 230 and they were thinking about free speech, that was not their concept of what free speech meant, was the ability to restrict API access over the objection of users themselves. But that's the defense that Facebook is taking. And when you take that kind of defense, no wonder Section 230 is under pressure. When the big guys take the laws that were supposed to protect all of us and make it like an axe or a weapon to protect their market dominance, oh man, that is like being in Tokyo when Godzilla and Mothra are going at it. We're just ants that get crushed as collateral damage because somebody's taken that position and just taking a maximalist stance on it that benefits them at the expense of anybody who's innovating or creating new opportunities.
Speaking of protecting market power, there's chatter that Lina Khan might be up for an FTC position, and it was her seminal paper that sort of sparked this whole antitrust conversation that we're having. What's your take on that? And I know you've had conversations of Lina. What do you think with Lena. What do you think of her?
Lena Khan is 3 years out of law school. I can't think of anyone that Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple should fear more than her. That girl has game. Okay. If you haven't read her work, okay, that resets the thinking as to like what the role of public policy and regulators should be. Instead of like thinking like this about like price levels, which are important, she's thinking about what are the implications in our society for the way we set the rules for inclusion, competition, and innovation. Like, oh my gosh, that you could like develop public policy that covered all those things instead of just stability and price levels. So yeah, if she pulls down that slot, I mean, that's like, in my mind, a big, big celebration. That's the new wave thinking. That's fresh faces. That's fresh energy. That's an amazing thing if that comes off. So I don't want to like predict it or hope too much for it because I might, jinx it.
Yeah, and I think that's what America really is all about, right? We just want a fair game that we can all get involved in. Right? So.
Well, no, that's the American ethos. But like if you like read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, he's like, I don't want competition.
Right.
I want to like be in markets where there's like no competition because that's where you can like make a lot of money. And so, you can talk like that, but that's competition for everyone else. But people that are in the market that they're in, they kind of like want to like, whether it's a monopoly or a duopoly, feels pretty comfortable. We have a lot of that in America. I think the philosophical definition, it came from Glengarry Glen Ross. First prize, Cadillac. Second prize, steak knives. Third prize, you're fired, right? And so in a lot of our industries, we have a dominant player earning excess profits. We have number two that's kind of like around, kind of getting the steak knives, and then everybody else is on their way, the road to perdition, bankruptcy, or worse, right? So in a lot of our segments, whether it's search or advertising, it's Cadillac, steak knives, and you're busted. Like look at Opera. There's Android, there's iOS. How's Windows CE doing? Like third place, pretty much you're out of the game.
No, do you have optimism though about sort of this next chapter, right? Because we have these heavy hitters, they're dominating, but it does seem like there are new things coming out that are potentially interesting, right? And changing people's minds and maybe disrupting the system a little bit.
I'm super optimistic. Every time after Godzilla and Mothra fight, you get a chance to rebuild Tokyo bigger and better next time. Like, yeah, there's a lot of destruction. Sometimes things have to get bad enough before them to get better, whether it's a pandemic or the financial crisis. Like, you need things to get bad enough for them to get better. And the actions of some of the big tech companies have been so egregious that it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, live in the city or live in a rural area, something's really messed up and something's going to have to be done about it. And so we're still at that, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. And there hasn't been a clear-sighted policy as to what's going to come out. And it doesn't really matter if they get it right. Even if they get it wrong, they'll try something else. That is the one good thing about America, is like, yeah, we make all sorts of mistakes, but every so often we get a chance to say, oh, that didn't work. We'll just do something else. There's no reason why Americans have to like double down on mistakes. We like fail fast, we fail big, and like that in our culture can be called learning. And so all these things that are going wrong this badly just mean we're just learning. So I'm super optimistic. Like I don't know. It is Schumpeter's creative destruction, and that is part of our our special formula. And so I'm not doom and gloom about any of this, because I am amazed at the energy and the innovations that are coming out of this, even though it's can feel pretty crushing. And I may not survive, but I think our society will. I might get crushed in some of these ventures and lose all my money and get my ass kicked. but I think that there are going to be a new generation of winners. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to have different firms on top. Just like if you went back 10 years, it wasn't the same companies that are on top that are here today. So it is still a dynamic situation, even if the folks at the top always look like there's no way to take them down. But, you know, they could be, and Facebook may have like mucked up enough that they could get knocked off the perch. I don't know how. I'm not saying it's going to be me or people I know, but when you do things as egregious as Facebook, you know, the universe has a certain logic to it, and it does tend to come back in balance. And I think even people at Facebook, like, it's very hard to attract top people to an organization that like clearly has been building the Death Star. You know, and I'm sure, look, I'm sure there were great people working for Darth Vader, but you know, it always seems like the talent ends up, you know, working at the rebellion because it's just not that much career advancement at the Death Star. You know, Darth probably isn't going to like give you the reins. And so, you know, I'm not looking for Zuckerberg to suddenly have like a change of heart. You know, Bill Gates did, but he had to like leave Microsoft to do it. And he spent 20 years making up for kind of some of the anti-competitive shit he did while he was there. And I think he paid his dues and with interest. And so, you know, will Zuckerberg do it? You know, I don't know, but
Well,
stranger
yeah,
things have happened.
I think Zuckerberg and Facebook know it as well, because they recently sent a company memo telling people it's probably not a good idea to wear a company swag right now. So
Yeah, it is. But, you know, I look, I would not put it past Mark Zuckerberg to change. He has it in him. He has the mental capacity to do so. Whether he has it in his heart to do so, I don't know. But I don't ever, you know, rule it out. You know, Gorbachev did it. People can change in a lifetime, in a moment in history. You know, you saw the change that happened in South Africa that made it possible to move from apartheid to a post-apartheid. I am an optimist. I've been around long enough to see things I never expect to happen that happen much better than I ever could have imagined or predicted or planned for. And so I'm just glad to have a ticket to the ride for this one. And, you know, Facebook, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they get to the level of deposing Mark and some of his lieutenants over their actions that have led to some of the situations that we're now reaping.
all right. Let's end on that positive note, right? Even Mark Zuckerberg can change.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be it for this time. Well, thanks for coming, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks, Alec. Take care.
Thanks, Greg.